He didn't even want to know where my apartment was. I didn't understand him. Only later did I realise he didn't want to endanger me.
This is a glimpse into the wartime experiences of David Gur. Today, he is a 96-year-old retired civil engineer who is both a friend and collaborator. During the Holocaust, as a teenager, David Gur was a leader in a truly incredible, non-violent resistance movement. This episode, me and my co-host Eva will discuss how this story brought us together and explore the resistance movement through the journal article The Dilemma of Rescue or Revolt by Israeli historian Asher Cohen. The questions that emerge from our discussion will then be put to our friend David Gur before the close of this episode. Strap yourselves in and enjoy the first of many podcasts by the Rescue and Resistance Learning Centre. I'm really good, thank you. You?
Great.
So I think a good way for us to start it is talking about how we met. So how long have we known each other for now?
So I think that we met in 2020 in September, maybe.
I think
Did it start?
Wasn't
Did
it
our
20?
start?
No,
Please?
2021.
No.
2021.
2021. Okay.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
So, and we met for
So we met at the Western Galilee College.
And the course is called the
Innovation and Entrepreneurship in Holocaust Memory.
So how did you come to? Did you express interest in that course? How did you come to be on the course in the first place?
So in the paper where I am the editor-in-chief, we advertised this course. And because one Hungarian guy called our attention to it, and then he sent us the link, and then we translated into Hungarian. I saw that it didn't get a lot of likes as a Facebook post, and not a lot of people read it, but I thought that it's the most interesting course in the universe, and I really needed it because I had this project. I wanted to do something with the topic of the Hungarian youth resistance movement in '44, and then I said that it's just a dream coming true, and then I met you there. That was another dream coming true.
Before we move on to
a hardworking person.
Before we move on to the resistance movement, so you've got quite a lot of experience, and you've got personal connections to the Holocaust, but you've worked with March of the Living. You've done academic things on the Holocaust as well. What's your background in Holocaust education?
So I was the leader of the volunteers in the Hungarian March of the Living in Budapest, and then when I moved to Israel in 2012. I stayed in contact with the March of the Living, the international organization. So I'm volunteering here now in Israel for March of the Living. So at March of the Living, I was in the latest years. I was working with other volunteers who would tour guide in Auschwitz, who would tour guide in the very unique rail car exhibition in Hungary, and so I was an unofficial supervisor, kind of somebody. And then I finished that. So I don't have any academic papers. I only have MAs. My first one is Slovak and English, and my second is journalism, and the third one is Jewish history. So that's the closest.
So how many times have you personally been on March of the Living?
So how many times that I can't tell, but that I know because I am counting the days how many days I was in Auschwitz. So that's I'm at 23.
Wow.
And I'm always saying that I'm competing with my grandmother, who was there for 2 months, and she was in the Mexico barrack, and she survived, and then that's how I could be born.
Wow. So you've been there. You've been to Auschwitz, Auschwitz-Birkenau, 23 times.
Yes, and then in the March of the Living, we always have a Hungarian commemoration in front of the Hungarian barrack. We have a huge Hungarian flag and an Israeli flag that we carry, and before we always have Jewish schools and non-Jewish schools. The participants are very different from the participants of March of the Living elsewhere in the world, because usually they are students who are prepared for this trip for the whole year, and then they don't only go for the Holocaust Memorial Day to Auschwitz, but before that they would visit other camps in Poland, and then after the Holocaust Memorial Day they would come to Israel and spend 1 week here. And for the Independence Day, which is 1 week after the Holocaust Day, there is another March of the Living in Jerusalem. So I'm usually joining that as well. But the Hungarian group doesn't really come to Israel, and it's a very different organization.
So you've been 23 times to Auschwitz. Does it feel any different because you've been back there so many times? Do you still get that feeling when you enter into Auschwitz, knowing what happened there, especially towards Hungarian Jews? And obviously you've got family connection. Was it your grandmother was actually in Auschwitz? Does it have less of an emotional impact because you've been so many times, or do you still get that feeling of just horror every time you go in there?
Yes, so there is the feeling is always the same. This is why I'm always because it's so heavy, it's so harsh, the feeling what you get there anyway, that I'm always suggesting to people to go for the March of the Living, because then there's like 10,000 people around with Israeli flags and with not only Jews celebrating life. That's why it's called March of the Living, celebrating the living instead of the death marches, So it's a very heavy experience every time, but somehow it melts it a little bit that there are other people who are feeling the same as you.
Yeah, so obviously this is a really good advertisement for March of the Living, because I think March of the Living's amazing as well. The first time I went, I met a Holocaust survivor at the school that I was working in, and the first time I ever heard March of the Living mentioned, he's called Asher Cohen. He's a Leeds-based Holocaust survivor, and he was in Auschwitz for a while. And he said he came to speak at my school, and I had been with one of my friends. I'd been to Theresienstadt, Terezin in the Czech Republic, just on holiday, because if you're interested in Holocaust education,
very
like
nice
I am.
Holiday, Jonny.
Well, we had fun in Prague, and then we went to Theresienstadt on the last day. But he was
to Theresienstadt.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. So he was kind of impressed that I'd spent my free time going to Terezin, and he was there for a while as well. So he said, "Have you ever heard of March of the Living?" And at this point, I've never heard of it ever. And he said, "Well, maybe you can come with me and the group that are going." So at that point, I still didn't know what March of the Living was, and so I rang the organizer of the British group that attends March of the Living, and it just so happened that there was a place spare for me, so I ended up going with him. And it's amazing for people that don't know what March of the Living is. It depends. There's many different programs that you can go on depending on how it's organized and how long you're going to stay for. But the first time I went, you go and you spend about a week in Poland, and you go to places. We started off in Warsaw, so you go to the Warsaw Ghetto, and then you tour around Poland. You go to the different extermination centers with with a world-class educator who's leading the group, and then most of the people that go on it are Jewish. I think everybody else in my group was Jewish. And then it ends in Auschwitz, and you go to Auschwitz 1, which was kind of the penal colony, which did have a gas chamber, but it's not as well known as Auschwitz 2, because there you've got those 2 really, but 4 massive gas chambers in Auschwitz-Birkenau, which is where the overwhelming majority...
Maybe Auschwitz 1 is known about the Appelplatz more.
So is that where they would do the roll call?
Yeah.
Yeah,
but
and
that's
then
not
there's
the
obviously
place. That's where the selection was, where Mengele was standing, where the trains arrived. That's Auschwitz too. Yes.
Yeah.
And there is the later.
And you start in Auschwitz 1, and it's really strange to be there on that day, because you're in Auschwitz 1, and there's a very celebratory mood. People, obviously it's about life, isn't it, and enjoyment, and kind of reclaiming that space. And there's about 10,000 people. When I went, I can't remember how many different nationalities there were there, but there's dozens of different nationalities.
Usually it's 53 countries.
Wow. So I went that first time with Eric Hirsch, and then when I was working in Japan, I just had an idea. Me and 2 of my colleagues, who are 2 of my best friends, had this idea. Like, why don't we try and take a group of Japanese kids there? And because it was a private school and they had the money there, we were able to organise it quite quickly. And like 5 months after having the idea, we were there in Auschwitz.
Which year was this?
2019.
Okay.
It was so what I planned to do was to go to Poland and then go to Israel afterwards, because I really wanted the Japanese kids to see Israel, because it's the most interesting place I've ever been in my entire life. And that was the plan. And then the chairman of this school where we worked, it's a private school, so he's like mayor of the town. It's called Ota in Japan. Quite an unpleasant character, not a nice guy whatsoever, probably like a right-wing Japanese politician. So he just finds out that we're going to Israel, and he's got like some prejudice against Israel. He thinks it's going to be too dangerous for the kids. So he just said, no, under no circumstances are they allowed to go to Israel. And I said, well, can I talk to him about it? Because the same school had allowed school trips to places in Africa before. So it didn't make sense. Like, as if going to Israel on this highly organised school trip with many, many different nationalities from all around the world, going to and he's just he's let students go to Africa before. So it's like, it doesn't, but in Japan, I mean, yeah, you have this, you hear about Israel, and then the first thing you think is the Israeli-Palestinian conflict. So he decided it was too dangerous. So what we did is, that was really disappointing, but instead, March of the Living, the person that I was working with, was really good. We went to Germany first and then went to Poland. So we had a week in Germany and then a week in Poland. But like, if anyone's listening or watching and they've never been on March of the Living and they've got a chance, or you've got students, no matter where you are in the world, as a teacher, do try and organise your students that trip, because the value for money was amazing as well, for what you get as a cohort that arrives there. So we both have kind of that connection to March of the Living. And you mentioned your grandmother was in Auschwitz for a while. So I think you've got more family connections. You mentioned your uncle before as well. And so what are your family connections to the Holocaust?
So all my grandparents, so for example, and my great-grandparents, my father as well. So my mom is the second generation in our family. My father was a first generation Holocaust survivor. He was 2 years old in 1944 when the Germans entered Hungary. And his father was taken to labor camp at the Don, and in 42, in the winter, he was still there when my father was born. And then he died around in January. So my father was born in December. And then we have his letters. But we don't know whether he knew that my father was born. And
Really?
my grandma,
That's so tragic.
the mom of my father, she was sort of resistant, but not in the resistance movement. So she had a little baby before that. She was pregnant, but when my father and my great grandparents got into the ghetto of Budapest, the big ghetto, because until then they were in a protected house in a street called Klausal, and not the street, the square, sorry. And so my grandma, she smuggled out my father, the 2-year-old baby, from the ghetto when the guard went somewhere in the pram, and then in the same pram she smuggled out my 2 great grandparents as well, so the whole family. And but she was also standing in line in the Vadasz street at the glass house, the so-called glass house, which was like a kind of an internment camp in Budapest. And in front of the glass house, there was always a big line queuing for forged documents, for counterfeited documents, and then but when she was queuing there, then the razzia came, so she had to hide in a shop of which sold gloves and umbrellas. And then that lady actually who owned that shop, she saved my grandma by that she hid her there. And not only that time, but later as well. And that's a very interesting story, that my grandma never gave out the name of this lady, because that lady didn't want. She could have been a righteous among the nations, and but she's in our memory like that she's the one who saved my grandma, and we don't know anything about her. And maybe we could somehow research that, but we never got to that at this point. And from the other side, from my mom's side, my grandma was, so that part is not from Budapest, but from Czechoslovakia, from a town called Shala, where I was born as well. And my grandma was taken away, deported to Auschwitz, and then in Birkenau, so in Auschwitz too, she was in the Mexico barrack. Her cousin was in the Canada barrack, the Canada Commando. And in the Canada Commando, there was all those people who were the most lively, most healthy people, who were the smartest in the eyes of the Nazis. And then they were distributing the food. They were taking apart the coats and taking out the gold from the coats, what was sewn into them. And then, so this cousin of my grandma, she smuggled potato to my grandma and to her sisters, which they could trade into a needle, and then that helped them surviving there. My grandfather, so my mom's father, he was in Bergen-Belsen. We know every detail about him because the Bergen-Belsen archives are digitalized, and my uncle, who is the brother of my mom, he lives in Germany, and he got a lot of information from them. So from Bergen, so my grandfather was taken to Bergen-Belsen from Hungary, from Budapest. He was hiding in Budapest until 44.
Wow.
So in a nutshell, I have grandparents, but my Mom never had grandparents because they were killed the first moment of the in the gas chambers.
Yeah, I'm surprised I've never asked you or heard this story before, because we've been working on the Holocaust in Hungary for about a year and a half now, haven't we?
Oh yeah, but Johnny, do you think that it's because of that that we have such an important topic that that is more important than us? It's greater than
Yeah,
us, and it's
exactly.
why we are working on it is because of that that it's not in the common knowledge, and actually we know why it's not in the common knowledge. There are a lot of
Yes.
explanations for that, and actually this paper what Asher Cohen wrote, it is also not only his paper but his book as well, the resistance, the Halutz resistance in Hungary from 42 to 44. It's criticized a lot. It's everywhere
Yes.
it's appreciated that he wrote it, but that he wrote these things, but very much criticized that everything is based on testimonies. But how is history written if not from testimonies? Tell me, you're the
Yeah,
historian.
well, it's cross referenced quite well. I think,
Mm-hmm.
if you've got many testimonies, and they're all saying the same thing, and it's not just he's used one type of witness or one type of testimony, he's cross-referencing many different types of witnesses. And yeah, history, the reason that we know how things what happened 1,000 years ago is from chroniclers and people that left testimonies. We would know very, very little about history, about anything that's happened before, if we didn't rely to a certain extent on testimonies. And it's not it's backed up by other evidence as well. It's he uses testimonies, but this matches the other evidence, because this period of history was not that long ago. So we have photographs, we have perpetrator documents, we have all these different kinds of testimony that back up what he's saying. And just before we get into his article proper, so just to go back to when we met on um, the course for innovation and entrepreneurship in Holocaust education. So it was kind of by chance that we came to be working together, because I'd met somebody, they were doing these coffee morning things, and I met somebody on one of those. You had to have like a virtual coffee with somebody. And then what we had to do, just for our audience, is we had to kind of pitch an idea and then splinter off into groups of about four. I think the maximum was four. So my idea, because my specialism, I'm the reason that I'm on the course in the first place is because I'm interested in Holocaust education as a teacher and a student, and I'm doing a PhD in Holocaust studies. So that's why I don't remember signing up for the course. I just got an email saying someone called Dr. Boaz Cohen wanted to speak with me. So I was like, I can't remember signing up, but I was just like, okay, that sounds interesting. I'll
You
speak
don't
to, I
remember
just don't
signing
know
up?
what,
I never knew that.
no, I don't know if they got my information or I signed up for it. So it was just by chance. I was just like, okay, I'll speak to him. But then I pitched my ideas, which is about my specialism, which is Holocaust perpetrators, and nobody seemed to like that. So I had to choose someone else's idea, and this other participant, who I won't name because I haven't asked his permission to use his name, but told me about your story, and said there's somebody who still knows a member of a resistance movement has been working with this person and is in contact with this person. It's called David Gur, and told me a little bit about this incredible story. And I'd never heard this story about the youth resistance movement in Hungary. And it's a non-violent resistance movement. So as a teacher, I saw that as perfect for like a classroom-based resource. So then I yours was the best project by far of any of the others. I looked at the others and I wasn't attracted or enticed by any of them. So I asked you, I said, can I join the course? And you said yes straight away. And then you told me more about this incredible story of David Gur. And we decided to make a resource package, so which we have and we had published with the kind help of Dr. Boaz Cohen and the other course instructor, who's Dr. Edna Pasha from Israeli Smart Cities. So we've got a resource package now. We're having a website made, and then this podcast is kind of the latest thing that we're doing. But because this story, we still have David Gur with us as well, and he's a member of our project. We view him as much of a member of the project as anyone else. It's really me, you, David Gur, Edna and Boaz, and that's really our team. But this story about David Gur, let's just can you just describe a little bit about who David Gur is and what he did during World War II?
So I met David Gur at an interview first. I heard about him a lot since I was working in March of the Living in Hungary. And he's one of the few survivors of the youth resistance, the Zionist youth resistance movement of Hungary from 1944. So he was an underground activist. Now, I met him because I wanted to make an interview with him, which is also a video interview. So with one of my friends, Daniel Beran, he was the cameraman. We made an interview with him, and we published it in a Hungarian website, which is not a website in the opposition, so to say. So I considered it very, very important that nowadays in the Hungarian media, there are some opposition websites, news sites, which are read by those people who might know this story already. So I wanted those to read it or to watch it who don't know about this story. And David Gur lives here very close to in Tel Aviv. Ramat Gan is the name of the place where he lives. It's in Ramat Gan, which is a suburb connecting city to Tel Aviv. He's 97 years old. And
is he 97
in
now?
Superb shape. Yes, because he was born in 1926 in Oka in Hungary, which is in the southeastern Hungary, and then in 1938, when the Hungarian regime began to implement the anti-Jewish laws, David's father lost his business license and the family's economic situation worsened. So that's when he was already thinking about, so 12 years old, when he started thinking about the Zionist idea that he wanted to move to Palestine and work the land. And then he moved to Budapest. He left Okain,
Just before we move on from that, I think, can we give a little bit of context to what was happening in 1938 in Hungary? Because that was a very important year for the escalation of the Holocaust in Hungary. So Hungary had lost
what
quite
would you like to talk about in 1938?
So just briefly, the Treaty of Trianon. So obviously Hungary was the Austro-Hungarian Empire was on the losing side of World War One. And they had land taken. They did everybody knows about the Treaty of Versailles, but not a lot of people know about the Treaty of Trianon. And Hungary. So
the Treaty of Trianon is a very interesting subject, because the Treaty of Trianon was made in 1920, and it's often referred as the peace dictate of Trianon. And it was prepared at the Paris Peace Conference and was signed in the chateau of the Grand Trianon in Versailles in 20. So it formally ended World War I between the Allies and the Kingdom of Hungary. And this is when the Kingdom of Hungary became small. So all those territories that now belong, the Hungarian territories that belong now to Slovakia, Slovenia, Romania, they were cut from Hungary. Now, the modern historiography is very interesting because the treaty is perceived. So there is a lasting impact on Hungarian politics and culture, they call it a tragedy, a trauma. There's a study which says that 2/3 of Hungarians agreed in 2020 that parts of the neighboring countries should belong to them. The highest percentage of in
I just want to inject a word. There's a word called irredentism, which means that you have grievances about getting the land back. So Hungary, after Trianon, it was very traumatizing for Hungarians that they'd had so much land and prestige taken away from them, and there was lots of irredentist claims. So they wanted to reclaim some of their former glory, but they wanted this land back. And as Nazi Germany grew in prestige and power in the 1930s, you have a movement economically first, starting in 1934, towards Nazi Germany as a geostrategic partner. And then in 1938, at the Vienna Accord, Hungary is ceded territory from Slovakia by Nazi Germany. So Hungary has invested interest in establishing strong ties with Nazi Germany, and then they start to institute anti-Semitic laws in Hungary. But there's one thing that I want to mention before we move on past 1938.
Let's not forget about the numerus clausus, which was in 20.
Yes.
Okay. So
that's
that
what
was
I was
already
just going to mention.
Yeah.
Exactly. I was just going to mention that. So Hungary was the first post-World War country to introduce anti-Semitic law in Europe. And this is really interesting because often, I think there's a historian called Georges, maybe like Georges or Georges Mosse, and he said, had he not known who had perpetrated the Holocaust, but he just knew it had happened and it had been perpetrated by a European country, he would have said, who would know the French could be so cruel? And the point that he's making is that lots of countries in Europe were very anti-Semitic, and there wasn't anything, the warning signs weren't really there decades back before the 1930s. Germany wasn't especially anti-Semitic if you're considering France, Russia, Poland, Hungary, obviously the first country to introduce anti-Semitic laws. So it's about that perspective, because now we know about the Holocaust, we always see Germany as the central anti-Semitic country in Europe, but what we learn, so if we look at it,
when we are talking about the Hungarian Holocaust or the Holocaust in Hungary, then two very, very odd facts are there on the table. That Hungarian, the anti-Semitism and the implementing of anti-Jewish laws started very early in Hungary, and then in the same time Hungary accepted the Slovak, the Polish, and other refugees, which increased the safety feeling of the Hungarian Jewry. So they felt safe in Hungary. And then the second fact is that the occupation, the German occupation, and the Germans marching into Hungary, and the evacuation of the Jews, they started when already all the people of the world knew what's gonna happen with them. So it was in that phase of the war when, for example, in Italy and in the Soviet Union, the front was already moving backwards. And in spite of this, almost or more than 600,000 Hungarian Jews were deported and evacuated, killed, murdered from Hungary.
Yeah.
So these two facts are very, very important.
Yeah, the second fact, and for people that don't know about the Holocaust in Hungary, I think this is one of the most astonishing things about it, and it's shocking, and it adds an extra layer of tragedy when the Holocaust in Hungary, there had been thousands of people murdered before 1944, but it's the spring of 1944, so March 1944, where Admiral Horthy, the leader of Hungary, had put out peace feelers to the Allies. So he's trying to broker for peace, because by this point Stalingrad's happened. It's obvious to everybody that Nazi Germany is, to say the least, on the retreat, and to be involved in the Holocaust at this late stage is quite astonishing. But Hungarians probably, understandably, thought that they wouldn't suffer the same fate as the countries around them, because they were still alive in 1944, and the height of the killing of the Holocaust had been in 1942. And Horthy puts out these peace feelers. The Germans have got an intelligence network that find out that he's trying to broker for peace, and they fully occupy Hungary. And then Eichmann comes in with a team of around 100, maybe 200 people, a small group of people come in, finds willing collaborators in the Hungarian establishment, and in 54 days...
And they implement the deportations in a few weeks.
Yeah, 54 days.
In a very organized way.
54 days they ghettoize, and then in another 54 days... hundreds of thousands of people have been shipped to Auschwitz and murdered there. And this is the context of the resistance movement that David Gur was involved. So so during this time of the Holocaust in Hungary, what exactly did David Gur, what exactly did he do, and what role did he play?
So he went to Budapest from Okany, and he started to learn useful trades to be living in Palestine afterwards. And then while he was working as a building, so this was in 38, 39.
Yeah.
38, 39. So he started building, working at constructions for a Jewish contractor, and then he began to take part in the underground activities of the Hashomer Hatzair movement. It was always a Zionist, and it still exists, a Zionist youth movement, which included helping refugees arriving from the neighboring countries. And then in March 1944, when the Germans, we say it invaded or occupied Hungary, but David Gur says that the Germans just arrived to Hungary. They just walked into Hungary. Nobody was against them, that they just occupied. So that's why he doesn't stand the word when I'm using it or when anyone else is using this, that invaded or occupied Hungary. It's not true, according to him, and I respect that. So when the Germans came into Hungary, the underground created a United Defense Committee, and then they started forging documents. So the first, he was a very good writer, like his hands were very smart. I don't know how you say it in English, sorry. So he could write very nicely and draw. And then he became one of the organizers and also the forgers of documents. So the first thing for them, for this youth, was that they had to go into illegality. So they had to forge for themselves the documents, and then all the rest came after that. There was a lot of activities what they were doing. They had to set up more workshops, so they had everything in a suitcase, so they could move the workshops from one apartment to another, and then they set up orphanages. They were feeding the children in the orphanages. They sent messengers to villages and to the countryside to let the Jews of the countryside know what's happening in Budapest, and then they were smuggling people to Romania from Hungary. So these huge activities they were doing, and it was and the number who they saved, how many people they saved. It's a very interesting thing because it always changes. So we don't.
Yeah, really difficult to know, isn't it? Difficult to know exactly who was saved by these documents. There's a couple of interesting things. Let's move towards the article then. So we're basing our discussion today on the article, which is The Dilemma of Rescue and Revolt by Asher Cohen, who was spoken about before, and he's talking about, in this article, he's talking about some people who chose to resist with force, so they chose an armed revolt, and then people like David Gur. This was a non-violent resistance movement, and the logo of our project is that stamp, because they would manufacture these stamps, and the last thing that needed to be done on a counterfeit document would be that stamping of the document. So for us, that stamp is the symbol, the best symbol of non-violent resistance, and using what's in between your ears instead of using your fists or a weapon to try and affect change. So in the article, at first, Asher Cohen, and I want to spend some time on how the article starts, because it starts with people who did choose armed resistance, and Abba Kovner is a very famous figure in the history of the Holocaust, and he was a Polish Jew, and he lived in Vilna, which is modern day Vilna in Lithuania. And at that time it was a part of Poland, and it fell because the first country that the Nazis invaded in the context of World War II was Poland. It became a part of Germany, but first it was part of the Soviet Union because of the pact that Ribbentrop and Molotov had signed, the Molotov-Ribbentrop Pact. So it was in the Soviet area of occupation, but then as Nazi Germany then invaded the Soviet Union in the summer of 1941, Vilna became one of the first sites of the Holocaust, because the Nazis and the Einsatz group and local collaborators started murdering Jews en masse. And there's one particular place that I think you mentioned that you went to quite recently, the Ponari Forest.
I was there, not recently, but I was there. I went. I was participating at the summer university, but this was like more than 15 years ago, and in Druskininkai, which is close to Vilna, and then. Because my mom in Budapest, she at the time she was the president of B'nai Brit, which is a great Jewish organization. She put me in contact with the president of B'nai Brit in Vilna, and he took me there. And it was quite a shocking sight, because there was nothing. There was nothing. He told me what was there, and
what
then there was a little plane, a little memorial in the forest. So
what happened?
It was very sad to see. A mass murder.
So what?
If you cut this out, we can look it up. What exactly happened?
So they were well en masse. I think the number in this small forest clearing, by the end of, I think, about 40,000 at least, Jews were murdered just in this forest by being shot to death. And Abba Kovner, he knew about what had happened in Ponary, and that spurred him on to write a manifesto. And there's some very famous lines from this manifesto, and essentially he's urging, he's a member of the United Partisan Organization, and he believes that Jewish people should fight as Jews against what's happening to them. And he writes a manifesto in 1941, and it's interesting because it's one of the first signs that Jewish people knew that Hitler and the Nazis and their collaborators were aiming to murder the Jewish population of Europe en masse. And he says in this manifesto, Hitler aims to destroy all the Jews of Europe. And then that really famous line, let us not go like sheep to the slaughter. Resistance is the only reply to the enemy. So he believed that rescue was untenable, and that what was needed was an armed revolt against what was happening to the Jews in modern day Lithuania, but which was then Poland.
And what's very interesting about this, that after the Holocaust, all the armed resistant movements, they were very much acknowledged and then recognized, and they are still in the common knowledge very, very much, and the non-armed resistance is not. So this is what is the reasoning of David Gur himself, that the ethos is not in the is not for the liking of the common knowledge. So this is the Jews were not using weapons, and that's why it's nothing what they did.
That's really interesting. And the figure of Abba Kovner, because you live in Israel, so you know how people in Israel view the legacy of Abba Kovner. How is he thought upon in Israel? What do people think about Abba Kovner?
So Abba Kovner is, I think, as a person who made Aliyah, and I am in Israel, and I know Abba Kovner also from this, that he was a resistant in the Second World War, in the Soviet occupation zone. But that he wrote the manifesto and the Vilna Ghetto and all this, what you said. But there's so many of these heroes here, that what makes him to be outstanding is not only his look and his beautiful hair, but on the pictures what I saw, of course, but his legacy in Beit HaTfutzot. Beit HaTfutzot is a museum which used to be called the Diaspora Museum, and Beit HaTfutzot in Hebrew. Now it's called the Anu Museum of the Jewish People. So he was the one who founded this museum, and according to his thoughts, that the old core exhibition was set up, Now it's a totally different exhibition, a new exhibition, which is also very good. But the Diaspora Museum was visited by every Jew when they came to Israel. So it was a very, very important museum. And hopefully it is still, and you can remember Abba Kovner there a lot.
So he's a hero. He's seen as a hero in Israel.
Yeah. I whoever knows him, because I'm not sure that that people would know him so well. The history teaching is not the strength of Israel, but because he was in Israel, maybe it is, because Israeli history is taught well in Israel.
Yeah, he had a really interesting post-war life. So after one really interesting thing, I think it's mentioned in the text, but I just want to talk about it, is straight after the war, he forms a group called Nakam, which means revenge, or also known as Dam Israel Noter, the blood of Israel avenges. And they had a couple of plans, and they wanted to reap revenge on the German population and specifically the SS. And they wanted to kill a large number of German citizens, millions. I think I've heard the number was 6 million. So they wanted to make up for the Holocaust in terms of German citizens.
Yeah.
And he went to Israel
was considered to be a fascist or propaganda person. Yeah.
And he went to Israel to acquire some poison. And he was going to poison the water supplies of Hamburg, Frankfurt, Munich and Nuremberg. And he was caught on his way back with this poison, I believe, and incarcerated. And another plan was to kill SS prisoners in Allied occupied prisoner of war camps. And one thing that they did do, it says in April 1946, in an internment camp near Nuremberg called Langwasser, Nakam coated many loaves of bread with arsenic, and 2,200 German prisoners fell ill, and 207 were hospitalized, but no deaths were reported. So it's just, I think there's a lot of, and this is probably for another podcast, but there's a lot of interesting things to say about revenge, the nature of
and he also testified
revenge
against Eichmann in the Eichmann trial in Israel.
He did, yes. Yeah, that was the other thing. And then, so Asher Cohen then moves on to probably the most famous instance of armed revolt during the Holocaust, which is the Warsaw Ghetto Uprising. And the Warsaw Ghetto Uprising happened in 1943. So in July of 1942, the Warsaw Ghetto, to its peak, housed around nearly 500,000 Jews, was squashed into a really depraved and deprived area of Warsaw. And then when Treblinka opens, which is the apex camp of a murder operation called Operation Reinhardt, when Treblinka, which is an a pure extermination centre, apart from about 1,000 people, maybe a bit less, that they would keep to operate the gas chambers and do other jobs around the extermination centre. When that becomes operational in July 1942, the Nazis start to empty the Warsaw Ghetto into Treblinka, and they murder, by the end of 1942, I think somewhere in the region of 270,000 people have been murdered in Treblinka. So by January 1943, the Warsaw Ghetto, the news has got to the Warsaw Ghetto about what's happening, and they're organising their own resistance movements called the ZOB, so a Jewish youth organisation, to resist deportation. And in January, when the Nazis are deporting some Jews, they come into some resistance, and then in retaliation for that, the Nazis murder 1,000 people in the Warsaw Ghetto. as retaliation. And then the Warsaw Ghetto Uprising happens in April 19th, and it lasts for about a month. So the armed resistors in the Warsaw Ghetto are able to hold the Nazis off for around a month, which is quite astonishing. An armed revolt against the might of Nazism, and you're in a ghetto. You've been deprived of food and sanitary conditions, and you're able to acquire arms and fight the Nazis for a month. Like, some countries weren't able to fight the Nazis for a month, so it's quite astonishing. And this is April the 19th in Israel is Holocaust Memorial Day, I believe, in Israel, April the 19th.
So it's not April the 19th, but it's according to the Hebrew calendar.
It is related to the Warsaw Ghetto Uprising, though, isn't it? The Israeli Holocaust Memorial Day.
Yeah. So the Israeli Holocaust it's the World Holocaust Memorial Day. Let me see.
In the UK, Holocaust Memorial Day is the 27th of January, when the Soviets arrived in Auschwitz.
So the 27th of January is a different thing. The 27th of January is the first 27th of that. It's the not European. Let me see.
So whilst you're looking that up, I just want to...
It's so long time ago. It's the Holocaust Remembrance Day. Auschwitz, we're going to still have several... wait. The UN. It's the UN Holocaust Memorial Day, the January 21st, 27th, and the Yom HaShoah, which is the Holocaust Memorial Day all over the world, is this one, the Warsaw Ghetto Uprising, and it's the April 19th, but it's
April 19th.
Yeah, in 2023 it was 18th of April. Next year it's gonna be May 6th, and then
it's interesting that they would. It shows how important to people this armed resistance was, that they would have the Holocaust Memorial Day. They want to associate that with Jews fighting rather than being victimized. And there's the uprising came to an end.
Nisan 27th. Yeah, that's the Hebrew date. Sorry, I was just looking for it.
There was a general called Jürgen Stroop.
Yeah, it was very important. Once I wrote one of my essays was about this in the university. Why this day is the Holocaust Memorial Day, and actually there is a very good Wikipedia article about it, and it's called Yom HaShoah, and then it also has that why it's called Yom HaShoah, what are the origins of it, why the Knesset and when they instituted this day in 1951, and why it became the Holocaust Remembrance Day, and also the picture in Wikipedia is important because the March of the Living is on it in 2014, and actually Raoul is there, who is chief rabbi of Israel and one of the founders of March of the Living. He's holding the Torah there. Sorry for the interruption. It's
no, that's important.
It's just a recommendation.
Yeah, and so the uprising came to an end, and it was the end was signified for the Germans by blowing up the Great Synagogue in Warsaw, and the person who led the suppression of the Warsaw Ghetto Uprising was a general called Jürgen Stroop. And one of the most amazing and incredible documents about the Holocaust is something called the Stroop Report. So those are those astonishing pictures that we see of the Warsaw Ghetto Uprising. There were 69 photographs taken for the Stroop Report. We think that this Stroop Report was made by Jürgen Stroop and his men to give to Heinrich Himmler as to evidence what the suppression of the Warsaw Ghetto Uprising. And I've got a couple of quotes by Jürgen Stroop, and I think I might choose one for my 3 quotes later, but I want to read one here. So Jürgen Stroop says, so this is during the uprising, and he says, May the 1st was memorable for a number of reasons. I witnessed an extraordinary scene that day. A group of prisoners, so this is Jürgen Stroop saying this, a group of prisoners had been herded into the square. In spite of their exhaustion, many of them held their heads high. I stood nearby, surrounded by my escort. Suddenly, I heard shots. A young Jew in his mid-20s, I'd guess, was firing a pistol at one of our police officers. 1, 2, 3, fast as lightning. One of the bullets hit the officer's hand. My men sprayed the Jew with fire. I managed to whip out my own pistol and hit him as he fell. As he lay dying, I stood over him, watching his life ebb away. So it's just that this guy was a horrendous perpetrator, and he was I think he was executed after the war for what he'd done. But he's a really good example of just how many Holocaust perpetrators there are, because I can imagine not many people know the name Jürgen Stroop, but obviously he was a horrendous human being. Now, what Asher Cohen, the point in this article is comparing these instances that we've just spoken about of armed resistance, of which there were many. We've spoken about a couple, Abba Kovner and his group, and then the Warsaw Ghetto Uprising. But there were also armed resistance movements in Czechoslovakia and many other ghettos, extermination centres. There was armed resistance in Treblinka, in Auschwitz. But in terms of Hungary, he talks about why there wasn't an armed resistance movement in Hungary and there was in Warsaw and these other places. And did you read this, and do you remember the reasons that he gives as to why they chose? Because there was this dilemma. It was like, well, we can't do both. We've either got to launch an armed revolt against them, or we can choose non-violent means and choose to rescue instead. So the article's called Rescue or Revolt, and obviously in Hungary they decided to choose rescue.
So how I understood it, that the Jewish Federation, the Jewish organizations were very strong and on the side of the government. And they wanted to match the needs of the government. So there was no, they didn't think of armed resistance. Now, those people who did the resistance, actually, there is a little group in Budapest, which is called the Little Warsaw, in the 8th district. There is a little square. Now there is the labor camp memorial by Danny Reisinger, and there is a little synagogue as well there. It's called the Teleki Square Synagogue, and in around that synagogue, there is an urban legend how the Lutz resistance or the youth Zionist resistance is also kind of an urban legend of Hungary. That there were these people who took Nazi, not even Nazi, the Arrow Cross, the Hungarian Nazi party uniforms, and then they took their guns, and then they disguised themselves as Arrow Cross people, the so-called Nyilas, and then they were killing whoever they found. Now, this story didn't go into the history books, and there's no testimonies about it, but there's legends. So we know this, that there was kind of an resistance, and then the non-armed resistance was not only these guys, these youngsters who we are talking about. So there was Raoul Wallenberg. He was not a Jew, but he saved Jews. Karl Lutz, Angelo Rotta. Karl Lutz was the Swiss consul. Angelo Rotta was the Italian. And there was the Palestine office in, and then there were in Istanbul, the Joint. So there was money there to save the Jews by Jewish organizations, from which these guys could feed. For example, we were talking about the orphanages, the children's homes. So how else would they have had money to feed those children in the children's home, if not from somewhere, for example, the Joint? Also, my father, when he was
It's interesting that lots of people, Raoul Wallenberg is almost a household name to people. Lots of people know who Raoul Wallenberg is, but Karl Lutz, much less people know about who he was, and I've always been, I don't know why that is, because his contribution was just as amazing, if not more so. I remember David Gur saying
because
that
he has a more interesting story. Come on, Wallenberg has the most interesting story. He disappeared. We never know. We will never know how he died. So that's a mysterious story how the Soviets took him, and then so that was an amazing story how he saved one by one the people at the train station, and he was giving out the Schutzpasses, the forged documents to the people still at the train station. He had the list, and then he was shouting the names and taking off people from the trains. Karl Lutz made something totally different. He made a pact with Stoyai, and then in return of weapons, he got visas. So all the visas, every visa, which was not a big number of visas, what he could initiate or how do you say issue
about eight, I think it was about
in the glass house. So in the glass house, in what we were talking about in connection with my grandmother Edith, that he in the glass house there was the forging workshop. So these guys, when they were not in the workshop of the youth resistance movement somewhere around town, then they were there in the glass house in Vadasz Street, and then they were forging documents, which were the documents for Aliyah. So one visa out of these 8,000 was, like, for example, for not for one person, but for maybe 100 people. So they were like group visas to make Aliyah to go to Palestine then. So Karl Lutz had a very different story. I think this is the reason, but maybe something totally different.
And in the article, Asher Cohen, just to finish this article off, he gives the main reason why this youth resistance movement. So we've got these foreign bureaucrats of Wallenberg and Lutz, but if we're talking about grassroots youth resistance movements, so the main reason that they did, in the end, they were toing and froing, shall we choose armed revolt or shall we do non-violent resistance, is that the conditions in Hungary were very different, especially to that of Poland. So the Polish had been ghettoized for, if you're talking about the Warsaw Ghetto, so they had been in ghettos for around 2 to 3 years, and they'd suffered in these ghettos, so they'd had time to plan, prepare. In Hungary, it happened just in such a such a lightning quick speed that they didn't have this opportunity to, they didn't have a defeated army either. So they didn't have these weapons, and they didn't have the opportunity to organize a proper armed revolt. So it was on the spot. They had to think, okay, how can I use? And I think this is tying into some of the bigger picture messages I think that we can get from this story. So what can students learn from this? That you have to do what you can, and they used their intelligence, their ingenuity, to do whatever they could in this situation. And this was okay. These forged passes, we don't have the time to sit around and think about this. We're just going to have to do what we can. And these forged passes were the direction that they chose to save lives.
Yeah, and then there is another name here. When he's talking about Asher Cohen, he's talking about Otto Komoly. That's a very, very important name, which is also not so well known as Wallenberg or all these other names from the Hungarian Holocaust. So Otto Komoly, he was originally an architect, and then but then he became a Zionist leader. He was one of the bravest. So he became the deputy chairman of the Hungarian Zionist Association in 1940, and then he wrote 2 books on Zionism. And then during the Holocaust, he was among the most prominent Hungarian Jewish leaders to participate in rescuing the Jews of Hungary. So he was a fixer, he was an organizer, he was in contact with everyone. And then when we are talking about history or urban legends, then Komoly is a historical personality. So Komoly's rescue action of children was his most successful achievement. He worked in this area with Friedrich Born, the representative of the International Red Cross in Hungary. And then he due to his work, the Zionist youth movement could work with the children's homes, what we already mentioned before. And so he was he died in 1945. He was shot by someone from the Arrow Cross Party in January in 1945 in the Danube River, and then he must be remembered as well. And then what is the most interesting thing now is that the World B'nai Brit, the International B'nai Brit, and on the top of it, the president of the B'nai Brit is Alan Schneider, who sits in Jerusalem, and it seems to me that he considers it as his life goal that Komoly Otto is remembered. And then so there was a very big commemoration of Komoly Otto in the Jerusalem forest. A little part of the forest is named after him now. So Otto Komoly is also mentioned here in the Asher Cohen article we are talking about now, the dilemma of rescue and revolt, and he was also unarmed.
Excellent. And yeah, that's so interesting, because he's not someone that I really knew, and I'm gonna go away and learn a bit more about him. And I think one thing that you said I think we should get into our 3 quotes now, because one thing that you just mentioned, which leads perfectly into into my three quotes is you mentioned, and we haven't talked about this yet, but you mentioned that he was shot in. Was he shot into the Danube by the Arrow Cross?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
So this is
we didn't
one thing
talk about. Yes.
No, yeah. So our audience probably don't know who the Arrow Cross are, but we haven't talked about collaboration, and this is quite a controversial topic. And one reason that I think our project is so important is the state of affairs in Hungary at the moment in terms of Holocaust memory and Holocaust denial and distortion is quite terrible. But Asher Cohen says one thing. He says towards the end, he says the majority of Hungarian people sympathized more with the persecutors than with their Jewish victims. And I know one of the most famous Holocaust historians of the Holocaust in Hungary, Randall L. Bramham, said something similar. But my quote, which is based on what I've just said there and links heavily, is by a Hungarian historian, and I'm sure you might know this guy. He's called Georgi Ranki. Is he a famous historian in Hungary?
Ranki György, yes. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, so he says,
Ranki György,
and this is quite a long quote, but I think it's worth quoting in length. He says, obviously, the German regime could operate only if it could rely to a large extent on the Hungarian state administrative machinery. Without the assistance of the various offices and the officialdom of the country, of the counties, the cities and the towns, as well as the police, the gendarme and the army, the whole Nazi conquering machine would, within a few days, have ground to a halt. What was unique about the German regime in Hungary was that a relatively large degree of national sovereignty was left in the hands of the Stoje government, who led the Arrow Cross, even more than had been done anywhere else. Yeah, even more than had been done anywhere else in Europe, including Denmark. The gendarme willingly assumed the task of organising the deportations with the help, direct or tacit, of the administration. So a lot of people won't know just how complicit in the murder of their own Jewish population the Hungarians were during World War II. And the Hungarians would deport them to the border. The Germans would then take over and then take them to Auschwitz. So they were partners in this murder operation. Is that how you see it?
Yes, I do, but I'm also very upset whenever the topic comes up here in Israel, because the narrative here in Israel is very different from the narrative in Hungary or among the Jews in Hungary. So here in Israel, it's like that it would happen the same way now as well, because the Hungarian nation is a fascist or Nazi nation. Now, I don't know how the personality development of a nation can be, but I would never think about Hungarians like this, because I don't think that it's anti-Semitism that is in Hungary. As I always say that anti-Semitism was a different thing before the war, and after the war, it's not. I always say it was not the best phrasing. So we always say, or there is a saying like this, and then Jews are not attacked in Hungary nowadays. Intolerance is a big lord in Hungary, and indifference as well, and not knowing about things as well. But you can read in old literature anti-Semitic voices, and then you can find anti-Semitic like undercover propaganda sometimes in politics nowadays as well, which is very, very sad. But in the same place, there's so many resistance movements right now in Hungary. There's so many civil organizations that are fighting the intolerance and anti-Semitism, and they are fighting for tolerance and for understanding each other, which is, I think, very important. Now, you asked me to pick also, and I don't know where. This is the one. So I had a quote which we talked about already, and it was a quote from the 124th page of the Asher Cohen article. With the onset of deportations from Slovakia, there was a simultaneous movement of Jews fleeing south. Most Slovak Jews had extensive family connections on the Hungarian side of the frontier, and since they also spoke Hungarian, they experienced little difficulty in moving through Hungary. So this is talking about Trianon. How can a person speak Hungarian from another country? Because that part of the country was cut and then stuck into a different country, into a neighboring country. We talked about this when we talked about in the beginning of this podcast about the Treaty of Trianon. My other quote connected actually to one of your questions, which I didn't expect, but we talked about it already. It's on the 125th page. The established Jewish community organizations closely linked to the Hungarian political elite until the latter severed connections remained disoriented and helpless. So this in a lot influenced then and now as well the lives of Jews in Hungary, and here we can talk about that the second half of the 19th century, a new branch of Judaism was born in Hungary. It was called, and it is still called, the Neologue. So the Neologue Jews only exist in Hungary and in little parts of Slovakia, Czech Republic, and Austria. And it started this whole branch of Judaism. It started like the Reform in Germany, the Reform Judaism, but then it turned back to Orthodox. And then it's still not defined what it is, but this is what the branch of Judaism is in Hungary right now. It's mostly cultural Jewishness and very secular, mostly secular, and then cultural. So this is how I would define it, right? Like in a nutshell. And the third quote was about Otto Komoly. The important role, it's on the 126th page. The Hungarian Zionist Association operated within the law until March 1944. The important role it played under German occupation was certainly unexpected. Four distinct and practically independent initiatives merit note: that of Otto Komoly, president of the association, who maintained contact with a number of prominent politicians in August 1944, established Department A for Children's Protection of the International Red Cross; that of Moshe Kraus, secretary of the Palestine office, who was in close communication with Swiss consul Karl Lutz and played a leading role in establishing a haven for many Jews at the so-called Glass House at 29 Vadasz Street, a Budapest building that enjoyed extraterritorial status; that of the Relief and Rescue Committee led by Rezső Kastner and Joel Brandt, and finally that of Halut's youth movements. And here came to one new name, because we talked about Joel Brandt already, Kastner, which is a whole other topic as well, so long and so controversial that we can make another podcast about him.
Yeah. The topic of resistance in Hungary is absolutely fascinating, even without the actions of David Gur and his comrades during World War II, because you've got all of these official resistance movements. You've got deals that are being done with the Nazis, and the morality of that. Do you do deals with the Nazis even if you feel like you're saving lives? So there's so much in here. So I think that, and when we get to the further reading section, hopefully some of our audience will go and just delve into this period of history, because it's absolutely fascinating. I've got one more quote that I want to read out. What they cannot find
in history books or anywhere is that, sorry to interrupt, Jonny, something came to my mind right now, that whenever we are saying that the Hungarian Jews, there was so many resistance and very creative ones, without arms, without weapons. I think it's a Hungarian thing, although Israelis would say that it's an Israeli thing to make everything in the smart way, it's also a Hungarian thing, that you solve everything is gonna be fine because you solve it, even if you don't have the opportunity for it. So you go against all the rules, which is a very good Hungarian characteristic as well.
Yeah, I think that's really good, because I'm going to talk about some of the bigger picture messages, what our students could learn from this period history. I think that's perfect for that. I just want to read out one quote before we move to the next section. So something, okay. I think this is from the article. It might be, I'm not sure, but it was. So the historian of the Warsaw Ghetto, Emanuel Ringelblum, who is a famous figure in Holocaust history. So he was a Jewish historian that was caught in the Warsaw Ghetto, and he began an archive that documented many things. He was eventually found in an underground bunker and shot. But one of the things that he chronicled was a saying that was in the Warsaw Ghetto that was to do with armed resistance, and it said, we must think not so much of saving our lives, but rather of dying an honourable death, dying with weapons in our hands. And that's one of those things that really, it just leaves you pause for thought, because we all have goals and ambitions in life, and it's incredible that my fellow human beings got to a stage in their life where their goal was to die in a dignified way. They knew that they were going to die, but it was important to them that they died in the right way. And that was one of those quotes that just made me stop and think about, the suffering of these people, but also how it mattered to them, how they died.
It's very important, I think, for everyone. It's a common thing that people want to die with dignity.
Yeah. And I'm not religious. And I don't really hold that many irrational views, but that's one. No, obviously, because I'm not religious, but it's always been something that I thought was really important. That people, how you die is important.
Well, I don't care about how I die, but I don't. For example, I don't want to be a burden to my family when I die. Okay, so that's a thing. Like you don't. Like I had an uncle who was already in brain death in the hospital, and then the family they had to decide whether they take him off from the machines. And we saw Arik Sharon, the Prime Minister of Israel, who fell into a coma, and he was living in a hospital like this for many, many years. And then we were always talking about it. Is it a dignified? Is there dignity there to keep someone alive like this? But of course, in the show, that's different. It's a different thing. Yes, what you are talking about right now, but it's for a lot of people, not only that is important, how you live, but how you die as well. And also, you don't want to be remembered that you were one of the sheep that went to the slaughterhouse.
Yeah. And so we've started talking about some of the bigger picture messages from this period of history, but the reason that I just saw straight away a resource package for young people in this is because of the inspiration that they can take from these people. There's a philosopher called Jean-Paul Sartre, and he's actually written on World War II. But one of his main philosophical tracts was No Excuses Existentialism. So people always present themselves with excuses why not to do something. And in this situation, the Zionist youth, they must have had so many excuses just to try and maintain their own existence and not try and help other people, but they were able to ignore all these excuses and do something truly incredible with their lives and to save lives. Because these people of the Zionist youth, these were the people who were most able to escape. They were young, they were fit, healthy, they had contacts. They could have just tried to do Teal themselves, but instead they chose to do something truly selfless and use all the skills and everything that they'd learned and all the courage that they had to try and help other people. And I think when you hear about their story, you realize that this level of selflessness is actually possible.
And it's the least what we can do is to spread the knowledge about them. And then how we made the study kit for English-speaking high schools and teachers to use, and an extraordinary classroom activity in their schools, and then we try to do as much as we can. My goal, of course, is a Netflix series like the Transatlantic, or because there are already so many books. If this camera was a little bit of a bigger, it could show a little bit of a bigger space. Like many of my shelves are full with books about this, how Jews were saving Jews during the Holocaust, how they were resisting the system, and what we can learn about them and from their activity. And we can't compare ourselves to them.
And we've started, obviously we've been thinking about a computer game for quite a while, haven't we? And we've contacted a game developer.
Yeah, that would be we need to get funds for that, for the video game, because that's a very, very big monetary investment. But when I'm talking with youngsters, then they are very interested in this game.
It would work. It would work. The game developer completely believes in the concept, doesn't he? When we've been speaking to him, he's sold on it.
Yeah, he's amazed by it, and then he did many of such games, and then it would be in Budapest, and it would the characters would be David Gur and his comrades or friends, and then how they got into the prison, and then how they survived, and how the workshop was moving from one to another apartment, and how the suitcase fell, and then how they got busted by the police, and then how they were forging the documents, and what they had to survive, and how they saved the other people. It's an interesting game, definitely.
How much do we need? 60,000 euros? Would that be enough, do you think? I think that was kind of the number that was
the least.
Okay. Get in contact. We want 60,000 euros, and we can talk if you've got 60,000 euros and you want to get on board.
And we can tell, right. we have the one pager as well. We can send you what this whole project is about. Yeah, just let us know if you would like to sponsor us.
Let's finish by looking at the photographs and then just talking about our further reading. So the audience have got lots of the further reading that I'm going to post is available for free, and then I've got a couple of books which I think you'd have to purchase, but if people are interested in this period of history, it's good to give them something.
Show me your photographs
first. First of all, sharing screen. Okay. Right, you can see that. So do you want to look at your photographs first or mine?
Yours.
Okay. Right. So these are from our resource package. So just a little bit of an advertisement as well, but I think another time we do a podcast just on these 24 photographs. Meet you and I think that would be really good. But for now, I'll show this one. So these are the Hungarian gendarme, and this is during. So I like this photograph. Like's probably not the right word, because obviously I hate it as well. But you can see the three main elements. You've got the perpetrators, and you've got the look on their face as well. I know they're having a picture taken, and it's like a photograph. Having a photograph taken is not a normal thing back then, like it is now. But to see the happiness on their face as these poor people are being dragged through, children as well, are being dragged through town, probably for the last time ever. It's almost certain that these people didn't return. They were probably murdered somewhere. So you've got the perpetrators, the glee on their face, the fact that there's not a Nazi in sight as well. These are just, everybody in this photograph is Hungarian, including these Jewish people. They're as Hungarian as these people. And then you've got the bystanders. He's just stood there with his hands in his pocket, and he's just come out to enjoy the show. There's like a young girl who's come out, and it's almost like a spectator sport. They've gone to enjoy this procession of absolute misery. And these people are just as necessary as these people. And I think that is one thing that I think students really need to understand.
Yeah, the smile on the gendarmes' faces, that's the shocking part of it, I think, and also the silent crowd that is watching the carriages with the Jews.
Yeah. I'm just going to show one more picture also in our resource package. I won't show that one, but I want to show this one, because this is always. I remember the first time I saw it, and these are Hungarian Jews. I remember the first time I saw this photograph.
In the second camp.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. So I've actually tried to work out, when I went to Auschwitz, the last time I went to Auschwitz, I actually tried to work out where this is, and me and a group of students went and put some toys down for these children at the bottom of these trees. I'm not sure if you found the exact tree, but we were in the vicinity of where they must have been waiting. And I remember the first time I ever saw this, and I've never forgotten. Yeah, exactly. I think it's near the gas chamber number 4. But yeah, I remember the first time I saw this, and I've never as much as I dislike looking at this photograph, I've shown it to so many people. I've shown it. I don't show graphic images to my students, but I do show them. There's not a dead body in sight here, but it's almost a graphic image in and of itself, because you know that within the hour, these people will be murdered in the most horrendous way possible, to die in a gas chamber.
Yeah, women and children, and then the men at the back.
Yeah, and when you would go into the gas chamber with your child, and this little girl here, obviously I've got a little girl myself now, not much older than that, but in the last moments, what your child does in a strange situation is they look to you for protection. So the last thing that these parents will have seen is kind of their child looking to them for protection, and there's no worse thought than not being able to protect your own child. So and there's little details. They're well dressed, because they will have been told you've got to leave the house. So you would dress your child in their best dress, and the fact that she's got a bow in her hair, and she's a little bit cold, you can see rubbing her hands together. But they also look quite bored, these people, and it shows that the subterfuge, the deceit has worked, and that they don't know what awaits them, because they were told, okay, you've had a long journey, you're going to go for a shower, then we're going to put you to work. And you can see the evidence of that dishonesty in this photograph. I take it you've seen this photograph before?
Yeah, not only in your from your collection, but yes, it's a known photograph, I think.
And obviously the victims in all of this, it's really important to focus on the victims for a while, but you also think about who's behind the camera as well. And there's a really interesting question about the morality of viewing this image, because these people haven't given their consent. There's a perpetrator stood behind the camera, and he is violating these people in a very vulnerable time. So I have to question myself as to whether or not, obviously you can see that I've chosen that it's important for people to see it even without the consent of the victims, but it's an ongoing question that I believe is important to ask ourselves and perhaps discuss with our students. Now, moving to your photographs here, which one, this one first? Which one would you like first? Does it matter?
Okay. Yeah, no, it's fine.
Go on.
So on this picture, okay, which one? This one? So on this picture, you can see David Gur behind the microphone, and it was taken. The picture was taken by me in Kibbutz Hazorea, which is in the north of Israel, last year. And end of last year, there was a ceremony that the state of Israel gave awards to the Hungarian resistant movement members, posthumous, and also there's 4 survivors still. Among them, David Gur was the only one who talked on behind the microphone. There was one other lady who was sitting in the audience, and she didn't go in on the stage, but she was also talking. There was more than 200 people in the audience, and it was a great organization that they were awarded last year. And on the other picture, what you saw before, where you could see me as well, there was David Gur and his wife.
I just want to make... I'll go to that in a moment. I just want to make one point about David Gur before we move on. He is the inspiration. We mentioned before at the beginning of the podcast. He's the inspiration of our project, and he's a team member. He's working with us, and I think that's quite an incredible thing for somebody in their 90s to spend their life trying to improve, make changes in the world. He's devoted to trying to make the world a better place through his story, and you can see that he's still
and he's not only helping us, he's not helping only us, he's helping with like he writes articles. For example, he wrote an article in this book, the B'nai Brit book. There was in the Yad Vashem, there is a classroom project about the Hungarian resistance movement, which is called the Storm, Vihar in Hungarian, or in the middle of the storm. That's the title of it. And then he gave the data and the research to it. And then Chava Baruch was the educational supervisor there. It's another classroom project. So on this picture you can see, so next to David Gur there is Nomi Gur on the left hand side with the red hair. She is a Wallenberg kid, so she was saved by Raoul Wallenberg, who we talked about before. And then this was in the Cinematheque, in an art cinema chain in Israel, in the Tel Aviv one. There was a film about Ocskai, who was in Budapest. He saved a lot of Jews in a sewing factory, which pretended to be a sewing factory in Budapest. And then there was this documentary film in the cinema about him and his life and what he did. And then David Gur was there with Nomi, his lifelong sweetheart, wife. And then in between me and David Gur, you can see Levente Benke, who is the ambassador to Israel of Hungary, and he's holding the book of David Gur, what was dedicated to him then, I guess. It's also a very recommended book to read. It's called in English Together Against the Flow, and it contains all the data from the Hungarian resistance movement. And then the next picture you could show, Jonny, please, and then I tell you what that is because we don't have that much time. Okay, so you don't see it very, very well, but now it's fine, it's better. It's the Schutzpass, or the protection paper of my grandfather, who was born in 1906, 28th of March. His name was Sándor Donát, or Alexander Donát, and his mother was called Weiss Etel. He was born in Vágselje, which is Shala in Slovakia, in Slovak language, and I was born there too. And here, the Nunciatura of the Pope, so it's the embassy of the Pope in Hungary, that gave obviously it's a forged document, but it's from there. So it's not from the Red Cross, it's not from the Swedish embassy, it's from the Vatican. And then when he came back from Bergen-Belsen, I think that the Jewish Museum was opened in 1954, maybe, in Budapest, I forget, sometime around then. And then he gave it to the museum immediately, and it was on exhibition until like 7 years ago, when they changed the core exhibition. So you could see this on the wall in a big copy. Now it's a different core exhibition, but the Hungarian Jewish Museum is an amazing one, because they kept it, and now it's in the open storage, so you can see it.
Wow. That must be an incredible document for you to look. When you look at that, it must be incredible for you to look at that, because that's the reason that you're alive, that piece of paper. One of the reasons, but obviously without that, you're not alive without that piece of paper. So just to end, we always like to give the audience an opportunity for further learning. So it can be a book, it can be a website, it can be a video. So I've chosen, and the links, obviously, I will put the links there just for our audience to click on. This one, I think, I'm pretty sure you'll have to buy this or borrow it. It's called The Holocaust in Hungary, Evolution of a Genocide. This is a book that I used a lot when I was making our resource package. So the authors, you might have to, I know that you know these authors, you might have to help me a bit on the pronunciation either. And on the screen now there'll be